The first thing that comes to mind is the fear of vulnerability.
Ooh.
Right?
I didn't know you were going to go there. But okay, yes. Hello, welcome to the Ask Self series. I'm your host, Nkem Cookey, and today we'll be talking about anxiety and depression in the Black community. Our intention is to shed light on issues related to mental health and to figure out how we can thrive in this experience. I've got with me my girl Nkiru. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And you?
I'm doing well. I'm so happy for you to join us today to have this conversation. So interestingly enough, there's so much I want to ask you.
Okay.
But before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that one size does not fit all in this conversation. Also, it's important to recognize the diversity within the Black community here and across the globe. We also want to say we have a lot of knowledge, but our perspective is also limited. So we're here to learn, understand, and just get some more information about what it is that we know and what it is that we don't know when it comes to this conversation. So there is so much to talk about, Nkiru, and I would love us to get to know you more.
Yeah.
Now, what we're going to do for this part of the episode is very different from typical, let's say, conversations or interviews. And so we have a little tin here with a bunch of questions, get to know you questions. And what I'm hoping is we can maybe answer 3 questions just for the sake of time, because there's so much more to talk about. And so please feel free to pick a question
Sure.
and read it out loud and feel free to answer. I will definitely join you.
Okay. So how did we meet?
Okay. How did we meet?
Well, this is the first time meeting today.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently at a wedding we were meant to meet, but
Yes.
logistics, eyesight.
didn't work.
Yeah.
So we have a mutual friend who introduced us like a few years back when I had actually gotten into the profession, and I was looking for some, I say guidance, I would say, in that sense. And turns out that he actually introduced me to you.
Yeah.
And we had like an hour-long conversation. It was like
More
a
than
really,
an hour.
like we had a really long conversation. And this just led to me understanding that, I am surrounded by people who have a lot of worthy information to share. And so, funny enough, that same person actually ended up getting married, which is why we were at different tables, but our tables were beside each other.
Right by each other.
And at no point did we realize,
No.
who or what or how we were like, or who we were in that sense. So months later, we were told that we were actually in the same space at the same time. Yeah. And this led into me reaching out again and then wanting you to come on the show to really talk to us about our profession. I mean, I don't meet a lot of therapists often, which is unfortunate. However, nowadays I am meeting a lot of people. But then it wasn't as frequent. So given our conversation, given your expertise, given the fact that we used to work in the same company.
So many connections.
So many connections. Yeah. This is why I would love us to have this conversation today. So thank you for joining us. And it's so lovely to honestly meet you and get to know you.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So next question.
Okay.
I wonder what you're going to pick.
I wonder too. Okay, so what would be the differences between mental health, mental illness, and mental wellness? That's a loaded question.
People tell me I really ask some loaded questions, honestly. So
but that's good.
Yeah, I think
conversation.
We need a lot of explanations, is what I'm understanding. So what would you say, is the difference or are the differences between mental illness, mental health, and mental wellness?
So I think when it comes to your overall mental health, so when you consider various factors like your social life, your work life, your, whatever that you're doing, whatever role you have in life, if you find that you're able to function, manage stress, and really be who you are without struggling with functionality, daily functionality in particular, that is what I would describe as mental health. Being able to, you know, have all that in one go and being able to manage the daily stresses that you're experiencing in life. Mental wellness, unfortunately, that comes with a lot of, underlining stigma when people think about, oh, well, I'm not as sick as this person. And as an example, let's say schizophrenia,
Mhm.
people think, well, I'm not as sick as that. So,
Mhm.
I don't think I need mental wellness or I don't need to dive into that. So I think mental wellness depends on who you are. And again, it isn't a one size fit all, like you said. What works for you wouldn't work for
Mhm.
me. And
Mhm.
being able to manage things and understand that that makes you feel whole, that makes you feel fulfilled in your life is
Mhm.
what would be part of your mental wellness.
Mhm.
And whether that means medication, therapy, holistic practices. There's a whole avenue to explore when it comes to mental wellness. And mental illness, I think it's all in the name, anything ranging from disordered and particularly, so just because you have anxiety or you experience anxiety doesn't mean you have a mental illness.
Mhm.
If it transitions into a disorder because of, various factors and assessments that have already been applied, then you can consider that a mental illness.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I totally agree. I think, especially when it comes to mental health and mental wellness,
Mhm.
and even mental illness, over the course of learning, that's when the differences began to show up. Because
Mhm.
before, I thought mental illness, mental health, and mental wellness were all just one thing. Until over time, you begin to actually hear, mental health could just be about your medication in that sense. However, mental wellness is like a holistic
Mhm.
perspective. And unfortunately, there's almost this kind of like, I want to say a negative connotation around holistic, or whenever someone says like this holistic practice or
Mhm.
perspective. So when we're talking about wellness, it's like the whole body, the
Yeah.
whole experience, you as an individual, you
Mhm.
within your community, you within your relationships.
Mhm.
So it's so interesting that you make those two differences. And I love the fact that you add that whole piece, because it really is about your whole self and
Mhm.
what your whole self is connected to.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting stuff that I'm learning as I continue to be in this profession. So last question,
Okay.
last question.
Let's see. Oh, I put two.
I was like, pick one, choose it. Like you have to
Sure.
pick whatever.
Like two. Oh,
Okay.
outside the lines. Okay. What is hard about getting over it? Hmm. So what would you say it is describing here?
So it would be in regards to mental health, or even it
Mm-hmm.
could be even in relation to anxiety and depression specifically, given
Okay.
that today's episode is
Yeah.
on that.
Okay. Um, well, I think when it comes to someone struggling with their mental health and maybe they don't even define it as that. They just feel as though they're lazy
Mm-hmm.
or they're procrastinating
Mm-hmm.
or they just don't have the motivation. I think it puts that person in a particular position where they are already telling things to themselves or, you know, disparaging or
Mm-hmm.
minimizing or dismissing. So if they then meet someone, let's say a family member, a loved one, friend, and they'd say, hey, I haven't been able to get out of bed or I haven't been able to wash your hair,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a flippant remark, which is unintentional, on the other person said, like, why don't you wash your hair?
Mhm,
What's so hard
mhm,
in getting out of bed,
mhm,
bird?
mhm.
So what's so hard in getting out of bed and doing what you need to do? And maybe you just need to manage your time better. That's another way, or at least from the other person's perspective, they might look at that and take it as, oh, you're telling me to get over
Mhm, right.
all these, issues I'm experiencing right now.
Mhm,
And I think it can be hard to navigate, especially if you just have that one conversation and you shut down. But if you're able to reach out to the resources that will be helpful to, get you back on track and to really validate what your experiences are in that moment, I think it gives you a new lease on life. It gives you, somewhat of I guess hope in a sense
Mhm.
where you don't think like, okay, this person is just dismissing feeling or what's going on with me.
Mhm. You know what you are saying, in terms of like, getting over it. So it's not something that someone does get over. It's kind of like you
Mhm.
have to get through that
You have to get
phase.
through it,
Yeah.
but you also shouldn't shut down with those initial conversations that you come across with maybe your loved ones because they don't know. It's so
Mm.
easy to, just say, "Oh, no, you can just do this or just do
Mhm.
that." And maybe
Okay.
in that moment, you're not even looking for solutions. You're just
Mhm.
looking for a listening ear just to, like I said, validate how you're feeling in that
And go
moment
from
because, you
there.
might even be questioning yourself, is this even real?
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to be intentional when you're speaking with someone because you just don't know how your words may impact them.
Very, very
Mhm.
important piece of
Mhm.
information. Thank you for sharing. So, you mentioned some very interesting and important points in regards to mental health as a whole. Now, I kind of want to bring the conversation towards anxiety and depression specifically. Bringing up something you said earlier was something along the lines of we have to be mindful of what we say to those people going through mental health issues. So when it comes to anxiety and depression specifically, or one or the other, depending on which one you wanted to explain first,
Mhm.
what would you say are some of the symptoms that we need to be mindful of so that we are aware of how we talk to people who are going through these?
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, as humans, we are ruled by emotions. So we wake up with emotions, we go to bed with emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and those emotions include anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Anxiety is the umbrella. So think of it as an umbrella term. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you were to unpack it, anxiety can be broken down into fear, into worry,
Mm-hmm.
into a sense of dread. So things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
So everyday people, including myself, I'm sure you, we worry about this,
Yes.
as we're doing this part time, anxiety levels are
Yes.
through the roof.
Yes.
But so being able to recognize that it's okay to feel fearful. Let's say if you have a big interview, if
Mm-hmm.
you're, sitting down in front of like 6 people with cameras staring at you. It's okay to feel, anxious and
Mm-hmm.
nervous and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
However, it takes a toll if it begins to take a toll on you where you can't even speak or you can't even be around people. So we're talking about social anxiety now.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
you just have a fear of leaving your house and you can't really pinpoint a particular trigger. Now we're talking about generalized anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Those types of anxiety are disorders and would require some level of assessment
Mm-hmm.
for you to get diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
But that is separate from feeling anxious. Just because you're feeling anxious doesn't mean you have generalized anxiety, or just because you're feeling anxious
Mm-hmm.
to leave your house, maybe there's a reason, and maybe you're feeling anxious to leave your house because if you go out, you have to be in traffic for an hour towards
Yeah.
Toronto and
Mm-hmm.
you never get there. Yeah, so things like that, just being able to differentiate it and give that simplistic explanation so people can understand that just because you're feeling this way doesn't mean you need to have this catastrophic thinking that your world is going to end or there's something
Mm-hmm.
wrong with you. You don't have a
Mm-hmm.
mental illness because you are feeling anxious.
Yeah.
Right.
So something that, I find myself wanting to acknowledge is, as a result of, the different things that can lead to these feelings or sensations,
Mhm.
something that I found interesting was how trauma can tie into anxiety and depression, but
Mhm.
that's something for a whole different episode. So whenever, let's say, these things, these feelings or sensations manifest, what I'm understanding is important to acknowledge how it's affecting you.
Yeah.
So when you are aware of the fact that it's preventing you from doing things, or it's too high, or the duration of it is too long, or lasting for too long, then this is when we can begin to, let's say, pay attention to it.
Yeah.
This brings me into how we might want to explore coping with these types of symptoms that we've kind of mentioned. What would you say are some ways that someone might want to cope with this experience? And I do want to pause you there,
Yeah.
especially if it's not within the significant disorder, or like it's not a disorder. Like, how do I deal with my everyday anxiety, or depression even?
Yeah. So I think everyone is aware of the red flags, in relationships, but there are red flags, within the mental health spectrum. And I usually say to clients, like, hey, I know, the red flags are, ugh, but take note of the yellow flag. So what I mean by that is don't wait till it's crippling to the point you can't get out of bed because you're feeling so anxious and you're experiencing maybe heart palpitations or, muscle spasms and intrusive thoughts, rumination. It could start by you recognizing that, oh, I haven't washed my hair in 2 weeks, while in the past you wash your hair every day. It could be something as basic as washing your hair. And it could lead up to, oh, I just realized I'm a diabetic. I haven't taken my medication. More severe. So not even having the motivation or the will to want to live because you are the anxiety is so crippling. You rather just, stay in bed and whatever that happens, happens.
Avoid it.
Right. Now, there are obviously other underlying issues because with anxiety can come other, presenting issues, like suicidal ideation. Why am I here? What's the point? Why am I going through this? Would people even miss me if I'm not here? So all of that need to be, addressed because it's really essential to make sure that you have for yourself a self-care routine, a regimen, something that works for you. So like I said in the beginning, what works for Nkem will not work for Nkiru. Right? So, finding what makes you feel balanced, what makes you feel fulfilled, and trying new things, challenging yourself, but also being aware of your limitations at this moment. Don't overly exert yourself mentally. If you're used to operating at a 10, and obviously there's that grief of not being operating at that level anymore. That's okay. Normalize it for yourself. We're humans. We go through trials and tribulations, and so does your mental health. So give yourself that permission to say, you know what, I'm not at a 10 right now, but that's okay. So maybe I need to bring it out to a 5. What does that look like for me? So if you're someone who goes to work, works a 9 to 5, comes home, goes to the gym an hour, you come back and you have family time. That was your self-care at a 10. But right now there's a loss of motivation. There's a lack of interest there, you know. And so a 5 might look like, okay, do I need to talk to my employer to see how they can best support me while I'm at this stage in my life? So maybe a reduced work hours could be explored, or taking time off of work, stress leave, medical leave, connecting with your doctor for that. And then in terms of, okay, well, maybe I need to go for a 30-minute walk or a 20-minute walk, rather than an hour in the gym lifting weights and, killing yourself and stuff like that. That's okay. That's your level 5, and that's okay. Normalize it for yourself. And I think if you start to make those little changes, it puts you in a better position to see that light at the end of the tunnel, because if you're anxiety and depression, and like you mentioned, trauma, and it's a huge conversation. It's really it's a lot to unpack there. They all go hand in hand. So really being mindful of what's going on within yourself, mentally, socially, financially. Even economically as well. So
Yeah,
yeah.
it's so interesting. You mentioned things like balance. You mentioned things like self care, and especially when it comes to the Black community, the connection between anxiety, depression, and trauma, and knowing oneself is so difficult, given just kind of like our
Mhm.
experience, not just as people or me and you, but more so even the generational experiences that we're not even consciously aware of in terms of how that has impacted us. So now I find myself wanting to pull into a different area or part of this conversation, which kind of goes into the barriers. Now, we both are Nigerian, and we live in Canada, we work in Canada, and
Thank God.
not to thank God, which speaks to our mental health and how difficult it is
Yeah.
to cope and to find balance. And that's why I mentioned that earlier, because when you actually think about it, what does that actually mean, especially when, let's say, your economy is going to shit? Sorry, my language. But that being said, these are the things that prevent us from
Yeah.
actually dealing with our mental health. So, just if you were to kind of name a few, what would you say are some of the barriers that are preventing, Black people, whether it be in Africa or here or North America? Like, what would you say are, and let's be mindful. I do want to say be mindful of, it is different in different places, but there are things that keep showing up wherever you go.
Yeah.
So, what would you say are some of those
The
barriers?
first thing that comes to mind is the fear of vulnerability. Right?
Ooh, I didn't know you were gonna go there. Well, okay, yes, okay.
And even for myself, we, speaking as a Black woman, we have those stereotypes out there that we have to live up to, unfortunately. That strong Black woman. And, I'm not a mule. Okay? I'm a human being. Right?
Facts.
I don't want to work myself to the grave. And I don't want to be in a position when I'm looking back on my life, I'm like, wow, I wish I did things differently. I wish maybe I opened up to this person or that person or expressed myself more. And, the fear of vulnerability puts us in a position where it manifests as anger. Why are you asking me about this? It's not your business.
Nigerians
How
and
about you
the
drink your water and mind your
rage.
business? I'm
It's
okay, leave me alone. The shoulder
the rage.
shrug.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it manifests in different ways and it pushes away those people who are trying to lean in to figure out, hey, what's wrong? Are you okay? For those who ask, right? So I think the fear of vulnerability is a big one, and being able to, take a step back and recognize that, strength comes from within. And just because you are feeling weak doesn't necessarily mean that you can tap into your strength at some point, given the right resources, given the right support. The other thing is stigma, cultural belief, right? I remember when I was starting my journey, and aunties and uncles were like, "Oh, you're going to study in school? Are you going to be our next doctor?"
Oh my God, I got that a lot. Yes, I
you
definitely
know,
got that a lot.
and so even being in that position where mentioning, "Oh, I'm feeling depressed. Why are you feeling depressed? You have a house, bills are paid, you have a job, you're living in a great economy, you know, if you want to go on the religious route, you woke up today healthy. God gave you
God
another
gave you. Oh
chance."
my God, is he God for me? No, God is great. Honestly,
God is
He
great.
is
It
great.
doesn't take away from the fact that,
Thank you.
there's still, everyday struggles that, can put you in such a precarious situation where you don't even feel like you want to live.
Yeah.
And it gets that deep. One thing I recognized within my practice is people are afraid to take it there, even if that's how they feel.
Are you saying outside your practice, like or in
Within and
within and
outside,
outside?
outside of my practice. Say if I were to come up to you, and even if I'm feeling bad and whatnot, I might want to minimize things, even though in my head
Sure.
I'm thinking I shouldn't be here. I don't want to be here. And so I say confront those thoughts. Again, with emotions, picture it as a dark cloud following you wherever you go.
Mhm.
Just like
Mhm.
trauma lives within you and presents itself in so many different ways.
Mhm.
So being able to recognize all of these barriers and understand that you have the capacity to change, to be that
Mhm.
difference. You know, we talk about generational wealth. We talk about,
Mhm.
you know, really being able to provide for our families. Let's shift that energy into being able to break those generational stigmas and barriers when it comes to mental health, having those conversations with our parents, with our children,
Mhm.
children's children,
Mhm.
you know, and just
Mhm.
community at large. Because if we normalize those conversations, it becomes easier to have wherever you go.
Yeah, and you raise such an important point. Just kind of like going back to
Mm-hmm.
something else you said, it's like the right support.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so hard to find, especially for Black people, Black women, Black men,
Mm-hmm.
especially within a way of or a service that is westernized,
Yes.
really, right? So it can be so difficult to figure out what right is because we even, as you said, we don't confront those feelings within
Mm-hmm.
this kind of system that isn't even set up to prioritize our own well-being.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting, you know, so many things you've raised. Honestly, there is not enough time to have this conversation. However, you know, I find myself wanting to shift to something else as well, which goes into like the policies. Now, you know, we
Mm-hmm.
mentioned as Nigerians, there is a huge difference between, you know, mental health policies in Nigeria versus mental health policies here in Canada. And so, something that I recently, not recent, but over time, I've been hearing about how they want to pass like a mental health bill or act
Mm-hmm.
in Nigeria, and they finally did that. So you know there strives forward, but now it now goes into the barriers that we were talking about. The infrastructure isn't there
Mm-hmm.
for like how many people are we? 200 million, right? Are we up to? I believe we're up to that.
Yeah. We're a
That's the
lot.
population. We're a lot, but there's not even up to 500
Yeah.
psychiatrists available to that large
Yeah.
population. So you know when we talk about the right help, it's like okay, who within this kind of community are we going to go to? If my mom is telling me pray,
Mm-hmm.
if my dad is
Mm-hmm.
telling me, you know, shove like keep your feelings to yourself, you know, man up, or you know, what are you talking about? Like, you know, do you know what I walked I walked a bunch of miles,
I
you
love
know,
my
like
walk.
these kinds of, you know,
Yes.
statements that really dismiss the reality of the mind and the body. So you raised so many points in that sense of what we are going through. And so again, you know, I think what I really want to emphasize is like what does the right support look like to you, especially given the environment that you're in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So something else that you've also brought to our awareness is, you know, culture and even just attitudes and beliefs. And how would you describe the impact of those, different views, different attitudes? How would you describe, let's say, the attitudes within the Black community? How would you describe how that impacts how
Mm-hmm.
we seek support?
I think it's getting better. I would say representation is key here, you know, and being able to know that, okay, I can access or have access to
Mm-hmm.
a Black therapist, regardless of where that
Mm-hmm.
therapist may come
Mm-hmm.
from.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, you know, we're skin folk.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think even if that gets you through the door, I think that in itself is an improvement. I would say, um, not taking away the responsibility from, you know, our white counterparts and who are in this field and being able to be multiculturally competent, right? And
Yeah.
understand that your lived experiences would look different from a young boy from South Sudan,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and their experience will look different from a young girl from Asia,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? So, not, and to understand that we are not a monolith, you know, and just because you saw a Black client from Nigeria and maybe your next client is a Black client from Nigeria doesn't mean they shared the same experience. So being mindful of that, because that could be a complete turn off.
Yeah.
And that can be dismissive to, both parties and their lived experiences if you're trying to conflate the two and think they're one. We're all sisters, but we still have our issues and diverse issues and whatnot. So
yeah, which speaks to what I mentioned earlier in the intro or acknowledgement of our situation, which is there is a lot of diversity within the Black community, and we do have to pay attention to that in order to support each other. And as therapists, whether it be Black or white or I won't say Caucasian, but or a different ethnicity, it becomes important for you to understand diversity within your own community as well as other communities that you may have access to or be exposed to given your profession. And not even just that, recognizing the historical experience that we are all having as it relates to our own ethnicity. We focused on the symptoms, we talked about coping, we talked about other people's experiences. What's interesting, though, is what we experience as people in the field. What is our mental health like? And in that sense of what we go through, I do believe a lot of people don't really understand, the difficulty of being a therapist and trying to, deal with your mental health as well, especially since we are learning. We're constantly unlearning. We're learning. We are in the community. We are just like so many other people. And yet we are taught these different strategies to support ourselves. So I'm curious, and feel free to share whatever feels comfortable for you. What would you say is your personal experience with anxiety and depression and how you've coped with it? As we've come a long way, really. We have.
Yeah. And you know what? It takes me back to when I started my practice. And just even in terms of practicum. So when we started
For a moment there, practicum is what we do after we finish all the coursework in our master's degree, and we got to do a placement at a particular institution that offers psychotherapy services, and you got to do it for a period of time. And in order to graduate, you have to complete that particular practicum. So that's what she means by practicum.
Yes. I love how you break it down. So my first client, I remember, was under the influence of said drug. I can't remember. And I was like, oh my goodness, of course I'm going to get this. This is good. Of course, why not? I make it Nkiru. Anyways, so in that moment, I started to panic, and it sort of tapped into my feelings of anxiousness and anxiety that I had been feeling. Because theory is one thing, learning in class and having that guidance from professors and whatnot. That's one thing, but putting theory to practice sometimes it's a transition within itself, and it comes with a big old bag of anxiety.
Yes,
right?
I agree.
So a lot of anxious feelings and whatnot. But one thing, and I say this to other students coming up as well. One thing my clinical supervisor had told me was, at the end of the day, as long as you don't do any harm, but as long as you're able to remain present and listen, you're going to be able to pick up what their needs are. And when in doubt, ask. Check in with the client. And that really helped me to navigate those anxious feelings going into every session, because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to get? What's going to be the issue here? And that really helped calm me down. So that's an example I would give in my professional life.
Yeah.
In my personal life, when I started, the lines were definitely blurred. Coming home from work, I don't know, I was feeling agitated, especially let's say if I'd seen close to 6 clients in a day, which is a lot. Imagine talking to 6 people for an hour or maybe more. It's a lot. It's a lot of talking. So, coming home, I don't want to talk to anyone. I have my husband galloping towards me like, go away. That kind of thing. So I had to explain to him, like, listen, son, I don't like you. Sorry, I can't stand you. But I just need a moment of quiet. And so that for me was my own way of engaging in self-care. Just going
Mhm.
to my room, maybe having a shower, just going to bed and just sitting or laying in peace.
I agree. I agree
Mm.
because, I relate to a lot of that, whereas that I would get home and not actually want to talk to people.
Yeah.
And yet I would have to like engage people for
Mhm.
whatever reason. And over the course of time, I had to actually like vocalize it, like, actually say like, hey, like, I need this time to kind of like step away from work,
Mhm.
transition into just being, yeah,
Decompress,
exactly,
yeah.
transition being to just an individual
Mhm.
and, not hear as much. And so interestingly enough, over time, I noticed that I didn't listen to music as much anymore because I just needed that silence.
Yeah.
I just needed to walk around my house without anything, like no one else speaking
Mhm.
or me just hearing my own thoughts, I guess, in that
Mhm.
sense. And
Yeah.
exactly, like I would literally take a shower, take some time, and then I would then go into picking up my phone and
Yeah.
engaging the world again. But that moment of silence, of peace after work,
Mhm.
powerful. Even partying sometimes I feel like I might just want to chill because, it's more stimulation after so much stimulation.
Yeah.
And so to navigate that was so important for me because, I am a social person. I do enjoy being with people. And as a result of being with people during the day and then having
Mhm.
to be with people at night, I had to figure out
That
what works for
balance.
me. Exactly. What works for me.
Yeah.
What I consider to be healing in my own experience of having to support other people heal.
Yeah.
Right. So I resonate with that so much. And I'm sure so many therapists do. And I'd be
Yes.
curious to, hear more stories in terms of
Uh-huh.
just how they,
I had
navigate
someone tell
that.
me, you're a therapist. Shouldn't you like talking to people? I'm like, no.
Not the straight up no. Okay, I agree. I completely
Yeah, it's a
agree.
complete sentence.
It's
No.
and it's two different things though,
Yeah.
right? Like I feel like on one level it's you're being professional. You have to be quite aware. You have
Yeah.
to notice a lot of things. It takes a lot,
Yeah.
a lot to sit and regulate yourself in a way that allows someone the space to deal with their own
Mhm.
experiences
Yeah.
versus, on a personal level where it's like, yo, every man for themselves, like we're
Yes.
just here to vibe,
Yeah.
just get that, that good feeling or whatever the case may be, or a bad feeling depending on the
Yeah.
situation.
And the other thing for me is I never want to be identified as just one thing. I'm
Mm,
multi-layered. There's a
sis.
lot of me. Okay. So
Sis.
I'm not just a therapist. I'm someone's
Sis.
daughter,
Sis.
someone's mother,
Sis. Like,
sister, auntie,
facts.
enemy.
Not the
You
enemy.
know?
Not the enemy. I completely
So,
agree.
I just want, and that brings in those conversations around therapists are human as well,
Hmm.
right?
Honestly, you are saying so many things that I want to hear and keep hearing because it can be so frustrating to run into people and they're like, are you psychoanalyzing me? I'm like, yo, you're not even paying me right now. So
Yes.
what are we even talking about? Like I am aware that you're here and a lot of the things kind of like translate or move
Mhm.
into my day to day. But
Yeah.
best believe I'm not,
Yeah.
analyzing you right now because, there's no reason to in this
Mhm.
situation. So
Mhm.
it's so interesting, I guess like from on a professional level when it comes to like anxiety and depression, I think the anxiety thing I do relate to, not even I think, I know I relate to the anxiety, especially when I'm dealing with more complicated clients or more complicated cases, or let's say my life is chaotic and now I have to show up and be present for
Mhm.
my client. I feel like that can be anxiety provoking because I'm trying to navigate what it's like to hold space for myself and not let that spill into the
Exactly.
experience that,
Yeah.
for someone else.
Yeah.
So it can be anxiety provoking when you feel like life is so chaotic and then you now
Mhm.
have to like go into that professional space
Mhm.
and not be that chaotic person honestly
Yeah.
in those sessions. So it can be anxiety provoking to just kind of like transition into that phase for sure.
Mhm.
On a personal level, I mean, oh my god, what doesn't give me anxiety nowadays? Like, you got to keep up with the bills, you got to keep up with your life responsibilities. I just think
Inflation.
it's like, like it's a daily experience.
Yeah.
However, luckily enough, I am able to have friends who I can talk to. I have things that I do. I have passions, or passion projects like this, or like other things
Mhm.
that I just
Mhm.
enjoy putting my energy to. So like I wouldn't be able to navigate a lot of these things without my friends. And also my friends validate me in their own, because they are going through their own experience. So we just, for like, I co-regulate with my friends, you know, in that sense. We all need
a social network.
Exactly.
No man's an island for people who love quotes.
Yeah.
No man is an island.
Facts. So isolation is great, but isolation over a long period of time, especially when you're going through.
Intentional isolation is great.
Facts.
Unintentional is.
Facts. But that even goes into, you know, I find myself even wanting, I won't go into too much detail in regards to that, but that even the idea of intentional and unintentional isolation, I would be curious to explore that more. Because a lot of times, even if you're doing it with intention, is it healthy? I think, is it working or is it not working? I think that's where I begin to kind of like, or that is where I would want this conversation to go when it comes to intentional or unintentional isolation. So I do find myself wanting to say thank you so much for allowing me to ask you all these questions. I enjoy talking to you.
Wonderful. And it's only the beginning for you.
Thank you. You are amazing. And I must say, like, everything we've talked about, everything you've been through, all the things that we've shared, I just look forward to like doing this with you. You know what I mean? And just getting better at this, honestly, because the only way from here is up, you know? And so this is where I want to share my appreciation for you coming here, taking the time out over the course of how many months to like do this with me and talk to us about, you know, mental health in the Black community. So this brings me to the, you know, next question, last question. I know. Who is one person that has played a significant role in helping you cope with any mental health issues, whether it be here or in Nigeria? You know, who would you say? You know, some people would be like, you didn't say me. I was there for you. I was with you.
I think, you know what? Family, I would say. And not just, you know, I'm not saying this because this is going to go out there. They're going to maybe see it. Family is important. And, you know, my identity is rooted in my family. And we're close. You know, I love and care about them. They annoy me, but that's family. And just being able to keep me grounded in those moments. But I think in terms of self-preservation, I would say myself as well, you know, because if I didn't know the things that I knew with regards to mental health, mental wellness, and the struggles, the everyday struggles that we can face, you know, I'll be oblivious to that. And I'm thankful I'm within a field that's given me so much education and resources and access, you know, but it's unfortunate that's not the story for everyone. So I recognize my privilege in that sense. But yeah.
Like if I could copy your answer, I would literally copy and paste everything you just said because it is a privilege. It is a privilege to have access to these kinds of resources because I think about how I didn't know how to live prior to this. I didn't know how to live. I mean, I did know how to love and live, but like the idea of it being a conscious, intentional thing was never really discussed. So when you say it that way, you know, it really brings up and resonates with me, you know, some of the feelings that I have towards this experience. I do find myself wanting to say I do have a love-hate relationship with this field because you're constantly learning. However, I appreciate the learning experiences that I have because it allows me to live.
Yeah.
It allows me to create the life that I deserve. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation. This is why I wanted to create this space for us to talk about mental health and share it with other people who aren't behind the scenes, who are kind of like missing out on little pieces and wondering, you know, does this actually work? You know, and again, it's not that, you know, it is about whether it works or doesn't work for you, but it's about understanding how and why it's not working or why it's working and being able to implement that in your day-to-day life in that sense. So on that note, I want to say thank you so much for coming in. And no problem. And I find myself wanting to look at this camera in this moment and say, you know, now that you know this, how are you going to spend some time to deal with your mental health, or what are you going to do about your mental health, as well as those people that are around you who are going through some of these symptoms that we've talked about thus far. And I do want to say, for the sake of myself and even you, please seek the support you deserve and that you need. Thank you so much for watching today's episode, and thank you, Nkiru, for joining. I hope you have a lovely